The cashier's hand closed around mine. His whisper cut through the noise. "Are you Derek's mother? They are bleeding him dry." I placed a simple vanilla cake on the counter. The screen blinked. Cake, $18.99. The receipt printer chattered the timestamp, clear. 3:42 p.m. May 15th. The cashier's hands trembled slightly as he slid the receipt toward me. Then, without warning, his left hand closed around mine. His grip was not hard, but it was firm enough to make me freeze. His voice dropped to a whisper, low enough that only I could hear. "Are you Derek's mother? You need to open your eyes. They are bleeding him dry." My body turned cold. The words pierced me sharper than any knife. I stared at him, unable to speak, my pulse pounding in my ears. The woman behind me in line sighed, impatient, but I could not move. I pulled my hand free and nodded stiffly as though I had not heard anything unusual. My legs carried me forward automatically, but instead of walking out through the front door, I veered sharply toward the back. My heart hammered against my ribs, as if I were running though my feet barely moved. The heavy metal door creaked open, and the sudden rush of cold air struck me like a slap. Outside behind the supermarket, the asphalt lot stretched wide, dotted with dumpsters and delivery trucks. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. My right hand shook uncontrollably. I had to clench it into a fist just to stop the trembling. That was when my phone lit up. Bright against the dim afternoon, the screen glowed with a message. "Mom, I need $200 right now. It's for Tanya's dad. He's in the hospital. Please send it." At the same instant, my call log filled with red notifications. 18 missed calls. All from my son and his wife. My chest tightened. 18 calls in less than 5 minutes. What emergency could possibly justify that? Or was it even an emergency at all? My instinct screamed at me to believe the cashier. Bleeding him dry. The phrase echoed like a drumbeat inside my head. I forced myself to move closer to the dumpsters, crouching slightly so I could see the parking lot without being seen. And there he was. Roy, my daughter-in-law's father, the man who, according to Tanya, had been drowning in medical bills for years. He walked across the lot with an ease that betrayed no sickness. In his right hand swung a glossy black shopping bag with gold lettering, an upscale brand one that sold luxury shoes and leather goods. Then came the sound. A click. A car alarm deactivating. He walked confidently toward a silver SUV, brand new, the paper dealer tag still taped across the rear window. He lifted the trunk with practiced ease and slid the bag inside. My knees almost gave way. A brand new car. A luxury bag. Yet my son had just begged me for $200 to cover hospital bills for this same man. The numbers crashed in my brain like a ledger gone wrong. 18 missed calls. $200. A cake worth $18.99, suddenly heavy in my hand, as though its price carried the weight of truth. "Lord," I whispered under my breath, my voice breaking, "give me strength to face what is coming." 18 missed calls in 5 minutes. $200 gone. A luxury bag sliding into a new SUV. I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. I buried my husband 12 years ago and have lived on my pension ever since. I thought I had seen every trick numbers could play, every scheme debt could spin. But I was wrong. What I witnessed behind that supermarket was the first crack in a facade that had swallowed my son whole. And before this story ends, you will understand why one whisper from a stranger changed everything. 18 missed calls. $3,200 gone. A luxury bag sliding into a brand new SUV. I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. It was about dignity, survival, and the choices you were forced to make when the people you loved needed more than you could reasonably give. My late husband used to tell me, "Dorothy, a paycheck is just a mirror. It shows you what you sacrificed to earn it." I never forgot those words. After his sudden passing from a stroke, I lived on a fixed income. My monthly pension check was exactly $1,420. My rent for a modest one-bedroom apartment on the south side was $780. Utilities, groceries, medication, all of it left me with maybe $100 of breathing room, if that. There was no cushion, no rainy day fund, just a woman stretching dollars until they screamed. I tracked every cent in a little notebook with a blue plastic cover, the kind you buy in bulk at office supply stores. I carried it everywhere, yet despite the arithmetic of survival, I had always been generous with my son. Derek was my only child. I had carried him into the world when I was 32 and nearly gave up my own dreams of becoming a school administrator so that I could focus on raising him. I worked as a school accountant for decades. My days were filled with spreadsheets, pay stubs, invoices, and balances. Numbers were my language, and caution was my instinct. But with Derek, I often silenced that cautious voice. Derek grew up bright, gentle, maybe too gentle for this world. He became a software engineer, working long hours, often logging in from home even after midnight. He was the kind of man who never complained about fatigue, who picked up extra shifts, who volunteered to cover for colleagues. That quality, that willingness to bend and give, was the very same quality that Tanya and her father Roy had latched onto, like wolves sniffing out the weakest member of a herd. Tanya, my daughter-in-law, was beautiful and charming. She had a disarming smile, the sort of smile that could make people forgive the inconsistencies in her stories. She would tell Derek that the hospital overcharged Roy, that prescriptions were out of reach, that the landlord threatened eviction. She always cried at the right moment, her voice trembling, her hands shaking just enough to look convincing. And Derek, with his tender heart, always believed her. Roy, her father, played the role of the frail patient. He limped, sometimes carried a cane, spoke of doctor visits and unpaid bills, but I had noticed how his limp seemed to disappear when he walked across a parking lot to shake a friend's hand. He complained of poverty, yet I once saw him with a watch that looked suspiciously like a Rolex. I brushed it aside, then thinking maybe it was a fake, maybe I was paranoid. But that memory returned to me like a hammer as I recalled the words the cashier had whispered, "They're bleeding him dry." Here was the cruel arithmetic. Derek earned about $6,000 a month, yet he lived like a college student eating ramen noodles and secondhand groceries. Meanwhile, Tanya's family always seemed to have new gadgets, new clothes, tickets to events. Derek explained it away. "They're struggling, Mom. They need me. And Tanya is my wife. Helping her family is my responsibility." That line, "helping her family is my responsibility," echoed in my mind like a bell tolling in the distance. Was it truly his responsibility to shoulder not just his marriage, but the entire weight of another household? Where does duty end and exploitation begin? I knew as soon as I would share this story. People watching or listening would argue about it. Some would say, that's what you do when you marry. You marry into everything, debts, burdens, parents. Others would say, no, you set boundaries. Marriage is partnership, not servitude. Even I wrestled with it because when I was married, my husband and I helped his sister through rough years. We shared what we had, even when we didn't have much. But there was a line, an unspoken line, that once crossed turns generosity into slavery. And Derek was blind to that line. I remembered one particular day. It was winter, the wind howled through the cracks of my apartment windows, and I had just pawned my wedding ring. The band was gold simple and carried 30 years of memories with it. But Tanya had come to me that afternoon with swollen eyes, sobbing that her father needed medicine immediately, that Derek had already emptied his account, that she had nowhere else to turn. My pension check wouldn't arrive for another week. So I went to the pawn shop. I remember standing in the cold afterward, bare finger aching not just from the wind, but from the hollow where the ring had been. I handed Tanya the cash. She clutched my hands, promised to pay me back. Of course she never did. And Derek never knew. To him, Tanya's tears were evidence enough of her sincerity. To me, they were performances. That day had cut me open, and I still bore the scar. But here is the cruel paradox. Parents will often endure humiliation for their children, and children blinded by loyalty will endure humiliation for their spouses. And when both of those currents collide, entire families drown. I thought back to my late husband again. He had warned me, Dorothy, don't confuse sacrifice with surrender. Sacrifice is a gift you choose. Surrender is when someone takes your choice away. How I wished Derek had heard that message in his bones, not just as words. Looking at him now, I saw a man who had surrendered more than he realized. His overtime checks went straight into Tanya's stories. His savings vanished into Roy's bottomless pit. And now, $200 had disappeared again. When I sat down to tally my own monthly budget, I could predict every dollar. Rent $780, utilities, about $150 groceries, around $200 medication, $90 bus pass, $60. That left maybe $140 for emergencies, one dental crown, one broken appliance, one hospital visit, and my whole life would collapse into debt. That was my reality. Meanwhile, Derek funneled thousands into a family that treated his sacrifice as entitlement. And this was the pivot point where society itself splits. Some people would call Derek noble, a dutiful husband, even a saint. Others would call him a fool, manipulated, and blind. I knew that if my story ever reached strangers, they would argue about it in comment sections and around kitchen tables. Should a man bankrupt himself for in-laws who refused to lift a finger, or should he protect his mother's last years of dignity, her meager pension, her fragile independence? I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at the numbers I had scribbled, the pension, the rent, the groceries, and now the pawn ticket for a wedding ring that would never come back. I folded the paper, pressed it against my lips, and closed my eyes. Healing, my husband's voice seemed to whisper through memory, doesn't come from giving everything away. Healing comes when you learn to say no. In that moment, I understood something vital. My silence had not protected Derek. It had enabled his blindness. I had given. I had endured. I had sold the symbols of my own life, and all it had done was make Tanya's family hungrier. Sacrifice without teaching boundaries wasn't love. It was self-destruction. I breathed deeply, clutching my empty finger where the ring had once sat, and resolved that the next time I faced Tanya Roy, or even Derek himself, I would not bite my tongue. I would not let my son's future be auctioned off, piece by piece, while I played the silent witness. For years I had thought I was protecting him, but protection without truth is just another form of betrayal. The drive back from the supermarket should have been quiet, but silence often screams louder than words. Derek's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, his knuckles pale in the afternoon light. I clutched my purse with both hands, my phone burning in my pocket. With the weight of that last message, "Mom, I need $200 right now." I turned toward him. My son. My only son. His profile looked tired lines etched around his mouth that I had not noticed before. His eyes stayed fixed on the road, but I could see the tension there. "Derek," I said softly, my voice calm but deliberate. "Why do you need $3,200 today, and why all the calls in 5 minutes?" He flinched, as if I had slapped him. For a moment he did not answer. Then he forced a smile quick and unconvincing. "It's nothing, Mom. Tanya's dad. He's having another health crisis. You know how it is. They're struggling. Another crisis." I cut in my tone, sharper now. I thought he already had insurance. I thought last month's request was for a surgery. What happened to that? He swallowed hard. His left hand tapped the steering wheel a nervous rhythm. "Things are complicated. Look, I'll cover it. I just thought maybe you could help until my paycheck clears. That's all." But his eyes betrayed him. In the rearview mirror, I caught his reflection. His gaze darted away from mine, then back again, filled with unease. It was the look of a man torn between loyalty and shame. The faceless camera of memory would have zoomed in then, not on me, but on him, on the sheen of sweat across his temple, on the twitch in his jaw, A son trying to protect his wife's family while hiding the truth from his mother. That look was a crack in the wall, the first fracture that told me everything was not what it seemed. We pulled into Tanya's driveway an hour later. The sun was beginning to sink, casting long shadows across the street. Her home looked ordinary, from the outside paint slightly chipped lawn in need of trimming. But the moment I stepped inside, my chest tightened. The dining table was already set, not with paper plates or chipped china, but with polished flatware that gleamed under the chandelier. On the center of the table sat a Bordeaux, still sealed its price sticker, screaming $219.95. A bottle worth 1/6 of my pension check, paraded like a trophy. My breath caught. $219.95. A single bottle of wine. The receipt glued to its side, as if mocking me. The faceless eye of the story would have zoomed in there, highlighting the numbers in bold. I did not need to imagine them. I saw them. Still sealed, still perfect, while my son asked me for thousands of dollars to cover so-called hospital bills. I stood frozen, my mind spinning. How many meals could that amount of money buy? How many rent checks could it cover? I thought of my own kitchen, of the generic soup cans lined neatly because I could not afford brand names. I thought of my heating bill in winter where I wore 2 sweaters so I could keep the thermostat low. And here on this table sat a bottle of wine that cost nearly 1/6 of my pension check. Tanya breezed into the room, smiling, her earrings catching the light. "Dorothy, so glad you came. We're celebrating small joys tonight. Dad's been feeling better, and Derek worked so hard last week. We thought we'd treat ourselves. Treat themselves." The words sliced through me, and this is where the social debate ignites. Was it fair that my side of the family, me a widow surviving on $420 a month, tightened every belt-pawned sentimental rings and counted every dollar, while the other side poured expensive wine into crystal glasses and called it celebration? Was it right that Derek, my son, bent his back, with overtime skipped meals, and sent money without question, only to watch it transformed into imported beef and luxury drinks? Some would argue, yes, marriage means you share burdens. Others would scream, no, there must be boundaries. I could already imagine the arguments in living rooms and online comment threads, people debating whether Derek was noble or naive. I did not speak. I did not accuse. Instead, I pressed my lips together until they turned white. My silence was not weakness. It was strategy. Anger without evidence is dismissed as paranoia. But patience gathers proof. We sat down at the table. Derek poured water for me, his hands still trembling. Tanya lifted the wine bottle proudly, as though the price tag was a medal. Roy clinked his glass with hers, his cheeks flushed, not with illness, but with satisfaction. The knife cut into a slab of imported beef juices, running across the porcelain plate. The sound of the blade against the plate rang in my ears, and in that sound, I heard my own memory, me alone at my kitchen table, slurping noodles from a 49-cent packet, because I had given away more than I could spare. I looked at Derek. My boy trying to smile, but his eyes betrayed him again. He saw the contradiction too. He knew deep down that something was wrong, but he was trapped, bound by promises and vows, by a heart too soft for the cruelty of manipulation. I clenched my hands under the table nails, digging into my palms. Rage burned in my chest, but I forced it down. If I exploded now, they would deny, deflect, and paint me as bitter. No, I told myself, not yet. Let them think I am blind. Let them underestimate me. Because evidence was piling up. The cashier's whisper, the 18 missed calls, the brand new SUV, and now a bottle of Bordeaux worth more than half my grocery budget for the month. The cracks were widening, and soon the whole facade would collapse. I sipped my water, nodded politely, and said nothing. In my silence, I learned. In my silence, I prepared. Patience is not weakness. Patience is the blade you sharpen quietly until the right moment arrives, and I knew my moment was coming. Sometimes the truth hides in plain sight, waiting for the right pair of eyes to notice. That evening, after the meal ended, Tanya excused herself to take a phone call. Roy stepped outside to smoke a cigar, and Derek busied himself with clearing plates. I stayed behind my heart, still pounding with the weight of the Bordeaux bottle on the table. Something in me whispered that if I looked closely enough, the mask would slip. The kitchen trash bin stood near the back door. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Paper towels, food scraps, a few napkins stained with red wine. But I had lived long enough to know that the trash tells the truth people try to hide. I reached down, careful not to draw attention. My fingers brushed against something slick. When I pulled it out, my stomach tightened. A receipt. The ink smudged but legible. Bordeaux, $219.95. Imported shellfish, $168.75. Luxury cheese, $94.50. I ran my thumb across the date. Yesterday. Not a week ago. Not months earlier. Yesterday. I folded the receipt into my palm and slipped it into my purse. That single slip of paper was more than numbers. It was proof. Proof that while my son begged me for money under the guise of hospital bills, his in-laws were feasting on luxuries I could barely pronounce. As I stood there, the back door creaked open. Mrs. Johnson, the neighbor from across the street, shuffled in with her grocery bags. She was in her late 70s, small and wiry, with eyes that had seen more than anyone gave her credit for. She smiled faintly when she saw me. "Evening, Dorothy," she said quietly. "They always put on a show when company comes, don't they?" Her words carried a weight heavier than the bags in her hands. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Funny thing is, every time I run into Tanya at the store, she tells me they're broke. Always broke. But then, just a few days later, I see the catering trucks. The parties. Champagne bottles clinking in the recycling bin. They think no one notices, but people do." Her gaze held mine, steady and knowing. In that moment, I felt something unexpected relief. It wasn't just me. I wasn't paranoid. Other people saw the cracks too. The truth was visible, if only you cared enough to look. I squeezed her hand, whispering, "Thank you." It was all I could manage, because what she gave me was not just information. She gave me confirmation. A quiet ally in a world that had begun to feel isolating. Later, when the guests dispersed and the house fell quiet, I lingered in the dining room. The smell of roasted meat still clung to the air. That was when I noticed a folded piece of paper sticking out from under a stack of magazines on the side table. I hesitated for only a moment before pulling it free. My heart nearly stopped when I saw it. A blue ink note in Tanya's rushed scrawl. Derek, 3,200. Wine, $220. The same sum my son begged for. The same wine flaunted on their table. Not coincidence, calculation. The numbers screamed from the page. The exact amount my son had begged me for. The exact price of the wine I had just watched them flaunt. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't misunderstanding. It was a ledger, casual and cruel. I stared at that scrap of paper, my hands trembling. It was so ordinary, so small, yet it held the weight of betrayal. The ink still fresh enough that it smudged under my fingertips. And here was the question, the social debate that would divide families and strangers alike. Was Tanya truly to blame, or was she just another pawn in her father's game? Could a young wife raised under a manipulative parent truly choose freely, or had Roy shaped her into an accomplice, using her tears and charm as weapons to siphon money from my son? Some would say Derek should have known better, that he should have stood firm. Others would argue that Tanya's manipulation was too sophisticated, too practiced, that the fault lay not in a single person, but in the cycle of exploitation passed down like an heirloom. For me, the question was simpler. Whether Tanya was victim or villain, the damage was real. Derek was being drained, and I, by extension, was being pulled into the same trap. I folded the note and tucked it into my pocket right beside the receipt. Together they felt heavy, like evidence in a trial not yet spoken aloud. I knew then that I was no longer just a bystander. I was an investigator building a case. When Derek came back into the room, I smiled at him, soft but tired. He sat across from me, his shoulders slumped. For a fleeting second, I wondered if he already knew, if he had seen enough to sense the truth, but was too afraid to admit it. His eyes searched mine, and I felt a surge of both love and sorrow. I wanted to reach across the table to hold his hands and tell him everything, but instead, I bit my tongue. This wasn't the time. Not yet. Accusations without a mountain of proof would be brushed aside. He would defend Tanya. He would say I misunderstood. And so I waited. Because healing doesn't come from anger. It comes from clarity, and clarity needs evidence. That night, as I walked back to my car, the cool air wrapped around me like a cloak. Mrs. Johnson waved from her porch, a silent gesture of solidarity. For the first time in weeks, I felt less alone. I unlocked my car, slid into the driver's seat, and rested my forehead against the steering wheel. The scraps of paper in my pocket felt like fire. Proof undeniable and raw. I whispered into the dark. They think I'm blind. But I see them now. I see it all. And with that, I started the engine. The road ahead was long filled with shadows. But I had taken the first step. I had evidence. And evidence more than anything was power. The night after I found Tanya's note, I couldn't sleep. The scraps of paper I had hidden away weighed heavier than any stone. My small apartment felt colder than usual. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight each second, echoing like a gavel in a courtroom. My mind replayed the Bordeaux, the receipt, the note in blue ink. Evidence, but not yet enough. That was when my phone buzzed. A text message, no name attached. Just a number I didn't recognize. My first instinct was fear scams, wrong numbers, more demands. But then I opened it. The message contained only a few words. You need to know the truth. Beneath it, an image appeared. My hands shook as I tapped it open. The photo was clear, a receipt from Sephora. Date stamped, time-printed, transaction number sharp against the white paper. The total jumped out at me like a knife slash. $482.60. I zoomed in. Lipstick, foundation, perfume brands Tanya once raved about in passing, claiming she could never afford them. But there they were, all itemized. And the date, my stomach clenched. It was the exact same day she had stood in my living room, crocodile tears spilling down her cheeks, begging me to help cover heart medication for her father. My throat tightened. I felt both vindicated and sick. I stared at the sender's number, then typed back cautiously, "Who are you?" The reply came a moment later. Eli. Cashier at Green Mart. I've seen enough to know your son is being drained. Thought you deserved to see too. For a moment, tears blurred my vision. A stranger cared enough to risk sending me proof, while my own son was blindfolded by loyalty and love. I whispered, "Thank you." Eli, though, he couldn't hear me. I saved the photo, tucked it into a folder on my phone, alongside the other evidence. Piece by piece, I was building a case. But cases aren't built on anger alone. They're built on patience, on layers of facts, so heavy that no denial can withstand them. That night, I sat at my desk and opened my old ledger book. My husband had once used it to balance our bills, each line neat and tidy. I flipped to a blank page and began my own accounting. Bordeaux, $219.95. Seafood, $168.75. Sephora, $482.60. Tanya's note, Derek, $3,200. The ink bled slightly on the page, but the numbers screamed at me. This wasn't generosity. This was extraction. And here lies the debate that divides families and neighbors alike. Should a mother step in, monitor, and even control how her married child spends money when it's clear they're being exploited? Or should she stay silent, respecting boundaries, even as the exploitation swallows him whole? Some will say it's none of my business. Others will say a mother's duty never ends, that silence is complicity. I knew where I stood. I would not stay silent. But I also knew the battlefield I was on. One wrong move, one accusation without enough proof, and Derek would turn on me instead. He would see me not as protector, but as enemy. So I chose silence. For now. The next morning, I made Derek breakfast in my apartment, something I hadn't done in months. Scrambled eggs, toast, black coffee. He looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped, eyes red from lack of sleep. He sat across from me, eating quietly, grateful but distracted. I wanted so badly to slam the receipt down on the table, to shout, "Open your eyes, son. They're bleeding you dry." But instead I poured him another cup of coffee. "Rough night?" I asked gently. He shrugged. "Just work stress. Tanya's worried about her dad again. Again. Always again." I nodded, forcing calm. "You're doing a lot, Derek. More than most. Just remember to take care of yourself too." His eyes softened, if only for a moment. "Thanks, Mum." He didn't know that in my purse, hidden between old bills, lay the photo of Tanya's $480 shopping spree. He didn't know I had a ledger with his name and theirs written like a case file. And he didn't know that I was preparing not just to confront, but to protect. Because real healing does not come from lashing out. It comes from ensuring that when the truth finally arrives, it is undeniable. Later that week, I returned to Tanya's house. She greeted me with her usual warmth, hugging me tightly, perfume, strong enough to sting my nose. I recognized it instantly. It was listed on the Sephora receipt. My chest burned, but I smiled anyway. "You smell lovely, dear," she beamed. Oh, it was a gift from a friend. I nodded, the lie settling heavy in the air. Another layer added to my growing case. I noticed Derek watching me, his eyes searching, almost pleading. Did he suspect? Did some part of him already know? But he said nothing. And neither did I. That evening when I got home, I placed the Sephora receipt next to the others. My ledger now looked like a battlefield map. Each number a bullet. Each note a scar. The shadows around this family were growing deeper. But so was my resolve. I whispered into the quiet of my apartment. Not much longer. The truth is building. And when it comes, it will crash down like a storm. It was Derek, not me, who stumbled across the notebook. And in many ways that discovery was more powerful than anything I could have uncovered on my own. It happened late one evening when I stopped by their house unannounced. Tanya was in the shower, the sound of water thundering through the thin walls. Roy had stepped out for his nightly drive. Something Derek said helped calm his nerves. I sat quietly at the kitchen table, sipping lukewarm tea, when Derek walked in, his face pale and drawn. He carried Tanya's handbag in one hand, his other hand trembling. "Mum," he whispered, almost ashamed. "I know I shouldn't be looking through her things, but something isn't right." I nodded silently. My throat was too tight for words. He sat down across from me, placing the bag on the table. With shaky fingers, he pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. The cover was worn cheap, the kind you could buy at a discount store. But when he opened it, the pages inside might as well have been a confession. The handwriting was unmistakably Tanya's curved letters, hurried strokes. Each page was dated, each line an entry. Not memories, not personal reflections, but transactions. March 12th, rent $1,500 from D. May 5, hospital $3,200 from D. June 2nd, vacation deposit $2,100 from D. July 18th, Roy's treatment $1,800 from D. Line after line, my son's name reduced to a single initial. D, every dollar catalogued, every sacrifice written down like an entry in a business ledger. Derek's face twisted as he flipped through the pages. His eyes scanned faster, his breath shallow. He stopped at one entry and froze. His hand trembled as he pointed to it. September 9th. Next step. Pressure. Dorothy to sign power of attorney. My name inked into their playbook. Derek's tears fell on the words as he whispered broken, "They're not just draining me, they want you too." I reached across the table, covering his hand with mine. For the first time since this nightmare began, his composure shattered. Tears welled in his eyes, spilling down his cheeks. I thought. He choked, his shoulders heaving. I thought I was helping. I thought I was being a good husband. But all this time, he slammed the notebook shut, pressing it against his chest, as if trying to crush the words inside. "They're not just using me. They're planning to use you." My heart ached watching him, my boy a grown man finally breaking under the weight of betrayal. And yet in those tears, I saw the first sign of healing. For once, he wasn't hiding behind excuses. He wasn't defending Tanya's family. He was seeing the truth raw and unfiltered. Here I know the viewers will argue. Some will say Derek should have known all along, that a man his age should never have let it go this far. They will call him weak, naive, cowardly. And maybe they're not entirely wrong, but others will see something different. They will see a kind heart exploited generosity, weaponized love turned into chains. And they will ask, the harder question, is it weakness to believe in someone you love? Or is it the cruelty of manipulation that deserves the blame? Derek wiped his eyes, but the tears kept coming. "Mom, I'm sorry. I should have listened to you. I should have noticed. I let them turn me into their wallet. And now I almost let them take you down too." I pulled him close, my hand against the back of his head, like when he was a child. "No, son. You are not weak. You are human. And humans can be fooled. What matters is that now you see it." He pulled back his face, streaked with tears, his jaw set tighter than I had ever seen. For the first time there was no denial in his eyes, no excuses, only fury and a strange kind of clarity. He opened the notebook again this time, flipping through with determination. "Look at this. Every single thing I gave them. Rent, vacations, wine, clothes, even notes on how to spin the stories." He turned the pages so I could see. One read, "Tell Dee it's urgent. Cry if needed." Another remind him Roy raised Tanya, a lone guilt tactic. My stomach churned. Manipulation laid out in ink like a playbook. Not chance, not bad luck. A plan. Derek slammed the notebook shut again. "We're going to stop this. No more money. No more lies. And when the time comes, everyone will know exactly what they've done." I studied his face. The same boy I had once rocked to sleep, now a man finally ready to stand up. And though my heart broke for his pain, it swelled with pride. This was the turning point. The day he stopped being their victim and started reclaiming himself. We sat in silence for a long while, the notebook between us like a third presence. Finally, I slid it toward my purse. "Keep it safe," he said, his voice steadier now. "We'll need it." I nodded. "We will." That night, as I drove home, the notebook resting on the seat beside me, I felt both dread and relief. Dread for the storm that was coming. Relief that at last my son had opened his eyes. Healing rarely begins with comfort. It begins with the pain of seeing your own name in a ledger of lies. Derek's tears fell on the words, "power of attorney," the moment he realized they were coming for me too. And in those tears Derek shed at the kitchen table, I saw not defeat, but the first fragile steps toward freedom. The night of Roy's birthday felt staged from the moment I arrived. His driveway was crowded with cars' headlights, cutting across the manicured lawn. The sound of laughter spilled out through the windows. Before I even stepped onto the porch, inside the house glowed with warm light, the air thick with perfume and roasted meats. I walked into the dining room and my stomach clenched. The table stretched the length of the room, draped in a white linen cloth. At its center, a tall bottle of Moet & Chandon champagne, price tag $119 still dangling. Crystal flutes froze as I laid out the evidence receipts, the notebook-like verdicts waiting to be read. Derek walked behind me, his steps heavy. His jaw was set, but I could feel the storm brewing inside him. Tanya floated around the room, hugging relatives, laughing too loudly, her sequined dress catching every flash of light. Roy sat at the head of the table, red-faced and smug, a cigar between his fingers. I took my seat quietly, my purse resting in my lap. Inside it were the receipts, the photographs, and the notebook. Evidence, proof. Weapons not of war, but of truth. Dinner began with excess. A Bordeaux receipt still in my purse, $219.95. Yet here lamb lobster imported olives towered before me, luxury bought with my son's broken back. Glass after glass of champagne poured, bubbles racing to the top. Derek pushed food around his plate, but didn't eat. I sipped water, my heart pounding in time with the clinking of forks against china. At one point, Tanya leaned across the table smiling sweetly. "Dorothy, you must try the lamb. We spared no expense tonight. Dad deserves the best." Her words landed heavy. Spared no expense. The phrase echoed in my mind, as if mocking me. My hand slipped into my purse. My fingers brushed the folder. My chest tightened. The moment had come. I stood slowly, the chair scraping against the hardwood. Conversation faltered. Dozens of eyes turned toward me, curious, expectant. My son looked up, startled, a question in his gaze. I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder. My hands did not shake. I placed it squarely in the center of the table, beside the gleaming champagne bottle. One by one, I laid the evidence out like cards in a game no one wanted to play. The receipt for the Bordeaux, $219.95. The receipt for the Sephora purchase, $482.60. The handwritten note, Derek, 3200 wine, 220s. Even my neighbor whispered later, "If strangers can see the truth, why can't your own son?" The notebook, with page after page of Derek's name, reduced to a single letter, every sacrifice documented like prey, caught in a net. The room fell silent. Only the faint hiss of champagne bubbles broke the stillness. I looked at Roy, then at Tanya. My voice did not rise. It did not crack. It carried steady, clear, every word a blade honed by patience. I laid the receipts beside the $190 Moet, its bubbles still rising. "While you drank champagne," I said, my voice cutting the silence, "my son broke his back for you." Forks froze midair. Faces turned white. A collective gasp swept the room. Forks clattered onto plates. Crystal glasses froze midair. The faces of relatives and neighbors drained of color, their eyes darting between the papers and the guilty parties. Tanya's smile collapsed. Her hands trembled as she reached for the notebook, but Derek's hand shot out first, slamming it shut with a force that rattled the glasses. Roy's cigar slipped from his fingers, rolling across the tablecloth, leaving a dark smudge. "This is outrageous," he barked, but his voice cracked thin and unconvincing. "And here is where society itself divides. Should I have kept this quiet, protected family dignity, handled it behind closed doors? Some would say yes, that public exposure is cruelty. But others, many others, would insist that silence only protects abusers, that truth, hidden, is truth denied. Tonight I chose the light. I chose to make sure every witness saw what had been done." Tanya's voice broke into a shrill pitch. "You're destroying us, Dorothy. You're tearing this family apart." Derek rose, his voice louder than hers for the first time. "No, it's the lies that destroyed this family. The lies and the greed." The words hung heavy in the air, undeniable. Roy tried to stand, but the weight of the stairs held him down. Neighbors whispered. Relatives shook their heads. The crystal glasses no longer sparkled. They looked like cages of light, trapping him under judgment. Tanya's eyes darted around the room, searching for support, but found none. Her sequins no longer shone. They glittered like broken glass. I remained standing, my hands folded in front of me. I had not shouted. I had not cursed. I had simply revealed. That was enough. Because sometimes the sharpest blade is not fury, but truth delivered with calm. The silence stretched until even the champagne lost its fizz. And in that silence, the power shifted. For years they had feasted on my son's labor, masked by stories of illness and hardship. But tonight their masks slipped, and everyone saw what lay beneath. And once truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. The silence after I laid the evidence on the table stretched long enough to feel like an eternity. Forks lay abandoned glasses, half raised, laughter suffocated in throats. It was then that Roy's face turned crimson, his forehead beaded with sweat. He wiped at it with the back of his hand, but the moisture kept returning, trickling down his temples, betraying the mask of confidence he tried to wear. He leaned forward, his voice shaking no longer, the booming command of the man at the head of the table. "Enough of this circus," he muttered. But the words were brittle hollow. Tanya hissed beside him. "Don't say another word." Her sequined sleeve brushed against his arm, but the damage had already begun. The pressure of the room, the relatives' eyes, the neighbors' murmurs pressed down on him like 1,000 stones. Roy slammed his palm against the table, rattling the crystal flutes. "Fine," he barked, his voice cracking with rage. "Yes, we chose Derek. We chose him because he was easy. Easy to bleed, easy to guilt, easy to control." The room gasped collectively, as if the very walls had inhaled. A confession not coaxed, not coerced, but spilled out in a moment of anger too raw to disguise. I stared at him, my hands still folded calmly in front of me. For years they had hidden behind excuses, veils of illness stories spun to wring sympathy. But here in front of everyone, Roy's own tongue had betrayed him. The social debate will rage, I know. Was this a true confession, or just words hurled in rage? Do villains reveal their schemes in moments of fury, or was Roy's slip nothing more than a desperate man losing control? Some will insist that anger speaks truth, the heart conceals. Others will argue it was only bluster, a man cornered lashing out. But in that moment, in that room, it didn't matter. The words hung in the air like smoke, undeniable and unforgettable. Tanya shot up from her chair shrieking, "Stop it, stop talking." She grabbed at his arm, but Roy shoved her off. The glitter on her dress seemed dull now, her performance shattered by the bluntness of his admission. Derek rose slowly from his seat. My son, who had been bent under the weight of shame for so long, now stood tall. His hand reached for the notebook on the table. He flipped it open, the pages fluttering Tanya's handwriting, screaming out their schemes. He lifted it high enough for all to see, then brought it down on the table with a crack that silenced even Tanya's cries. "This ends," now Derek said, his voice steady, commanding. "This marriage ends now. I will not be your wallet. I will not be your victim." The strength in his words made my throat tighten. It wasn't just a man rejecting a wife who had betrayed him. It was a man reclaiming his own voice after years of silence. Tanya's face twisted, streaks of mascara running as she shouted, "You're nothing without us. You'll crawl back." Derek met her glare with something new in his eyes, clarity. "No," he said simply. "I won't." Neighbors shifted uncomfortably, whispers rippling like waves through the crowd. Aunts and uncles averted their eyes, unwilling to defend what had just been exposed. The power had shifted entirely, not through violence or rage, but through evidence and a confession too loud to be ignored. Roy collapsed back into his chair, the energy draining from him. His hands shook as he reached for the champagne glass, but he couldn't lift it. His words still echoed in the air, damning him more effectively than any accusation ever could. Derek turned, then looking at me. His jaw trembled, but his voice held. "Mom, I'm sorry. I let it go too far. But I see it now, and I'm done." I wanted to hold him, to tell him none of this was his fault, but I stayed still because this was his moment. He didn't need his mother to shield him. He needed to stand in his own strength, and he did. That night was not just the collapse of a marriage. It was the rebirth of a man. For the first time in years, Derek was no longer bent under the weight of manipulation. He was upright, unbroken, and free. And as I stood watching him, I knew healing had already begun. The days after that confrontation blurred together, but the fallout was swift and merciless. Tanya and Roy packed their things within a week. The once busy driveway that used to host their endless gatherings emptied out overnight. The neighbors who had once been polite if cautious no longer hid their contempt. One morning, as I walked past their house on my way to the market, I stopped cold. Pinned to the front door with masking tape was a large piece of poster board. Scrawled in thick black marker were the words, "Scammer Family." Someone had underlined it twice, the ink pressed so hard it tore the paper. The sight hit me like a punch. For years they had lived off illusions, stories of illness, financial struggles, and false humility. Now the truth was pasted for all to see, bold and ugly, like a brand burned into the wood. Cars slowed as they passed, drivers rolling down windows to read it. Neighbors whispered in low voices, some shaking their heads, others smirking with satisfaction. Justice in its rawest form had come not through courts or police, but through community memory. Once exposed, their names would never fully recover. Derek stood beside me, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. His eyes lingered on the sign. "Do you think it's too much?" he asked quietly. I studied the words again. Part of me ached with pity. Tanya had once been a bright-eyed girl who could light up a room with her laughter. Roy had been a man who commanded attention. And yet here they were reduced to a single word, scammers. But another part of me knew the neighbors weren't wrong. Too many people had been hurt. Too many sacrifices had been stolen. The social debate will rage, I thought. Some will argue Tanya was as much a victim as anyone manipulated by her father, trapped in a cycle of greed she didn't create. Others will claim she was a willing participant, her handwriting in the notebook, proof enough of her collusion. Was she a pawn, or was she a partner? That question might never find one answer. I turned to Derek. "The world will always have its opinions," I told him. "What matters is what you know to be true." She chose her path. "And now you have to choose yours." He nodded, though his eyes were clouded with sadness. Divorce papers were already in motion, and Tanya hadn't contested. Maybe she understood the game was over. Maybe she simply wanted to escape the humiliation. At home that evening, I found myself opening the small wooden jewelry box on my dresser. Inside, nestled against faded velvet, was my old wedding ring. I had kept it tucked away for years, a relic of a past I sometimes wished I could forget. The gold band was simple, its surface scratched and worn from decades of use. Yet when I slipped it between my fingers, memories flooded back. My late husband's smile on our wedding day. The way he worked long hours at the factory, then came home smelling of oil and iron, but still found the strength to kiss me goodnight. The nights we argued over bills, but always ended up laughing over instant noodles at the kitchen table. I pressed the ring to my lips, and then I whispered more to myself than anyone else. This time I kept both. The inheritance and my son. It was not just about money. It was about preserving what mattered, dignity, boundaries, and love unbroken by deceit. Derek watched from the doorway, his guitar case slung over his shoulder. For the first time in years, he was smiling without effort. "Mom," he said, "I'm going to meet Angela tomorrow. She asked me to play again, just for fun." Angela, his co-worker, had been the one reminding him gently that generosity was not weakness, but without boundaries, it became destruction. Perhaps she saw the part of him that Tanya never cared for, the quiet talent, the earnest heart. I smiled back. "Play for yourself first. The rest will follow." Healing never comes in grand gestures. It comes in moments like these, choosing to pick up an instrument again, to trust a friend, to laugh after months of silence. Later that night, I sat by the window, the cool autumn air brushing against my face. The street outside was quiet, the hum of distant cars like a lullaby. I slipped the wedding ring onto my finger, feeling the familiar weight, not as a symbol of loss, but as a reminder that love, real love, leaves marks that last, even when people are gone. I had faced betrayal, watched my son nearly destroyed, and carried the weight of silence for too long. But standing there with the ring warm against my skin, I knew we had crossed the darkest valley. For the first time in years, peace felt possible. 6 months later, the rhythm of our lives had shifted. The storm had passed, leaving behind scars, but also space for something new to grow. Derek signed the papers on a modest condo in Southside Chicago. The place was small, nothing flashy, but it was his. The deed bore his name alone, and the price of $148,000 was something he paid for with his own salary. No borrowed money, no hidden strings, no manipulation. The first time I visited, the smell of fresh paint still lingered in the halls. The kitchen gleamed with second-hand appliances, scrubbed until they looked nearly new. A single guitar leaned against the corner wall of the living room case, unlatched, as if inviting him to play whenever he felt the urge. He beamed as he showed me around. "It isn't much, Mum," he said, "but it's mine. Paid for by me, not by lies or debts." I walked slowly through the space, running my fingers along the window frame, feeling the cool draft of the Chicago wind seeping through. Pride swelled in my chest. This was not just a home. It was proof of growth, of survival. Then came the question that split my heart in two. "Mom, would you like to move in with me? We could share the space. You wouldn't have to live alone anymore." The debate is one familiar to many families, especially those of my generation. Should an adult child care for their aging parent by offering a shared home, or should they honor the independence that the parent has fought hard to preserve? Some will argue I should accept that family is meant to live together, that loneliness can weigh heavier than bills. Others will say independence is dignity, and that moving in would blur the boundaries I had fought to establish. I smiled, touched his cheek. "I love you, Derek. But no, this is your place, your life. I need to keep my own independence as much as you need to live freely. That balance is our gift to each other." He didn't protest. He nodded, a quiet acceptance in his eyes. He understood. That was enough. The healing came not in grand celebrations, but in the gentleness of ordinary mornings. At my own apartment, I brewed tea in my chipped porcelain cup, steam rising in soft curls. Sunlight spilled across the table, golden and forgiving. I lifted the cup with steady hands, savoring the warmth as it pressed into my palms. For the first time in years, I felt no heaviness pressing against my chest, no dread of the next phone call, the next request, the next lie. My son was free, and so was I. Healing, I realized, is not about erasing the pain. It's about learning to live with it, letting it shape you into someone stronger, calmer, wiser. I leaned back in my chair, watching the city wake beyond my window. Life would always bring storms. Betrayal might always cut deeper when it comes from family. But dignity, once reclaimed, is unshakable. And so I leave you with this thought, spoken from the quiet strength of a woman who has lived long enough to know silence is not weakness. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are how we protect the love that truly matters. Now I ask you, the one listening to my story, are you giving so much that you are forgetting yourself?